Hey friends, it is Durosai here. Hope you all are doing well and staying creative. In this video, I'll be covering 5 beginner common producing mistakes that you want to avoid. Now, if you like this kind of content and find it helpful, leave that like, and if you want to see more of these videos, hit that subscribe button along with the notification bell. Alright, now let's get into mistake number 1, and that is too much reverb. I see this a lot, especially with people who are just starting out with producing, and the reverb can be a pretty exciting tool because it does make everything sound like cool, big, spacious, and all that, but you want to use it conservatively. You don't want to go too hard with the reverb because if you add a bunch of reverb to everything, it's just going to muddy up your mix and nothing's really going to be be forward in your mix. The reverb, what that does, especially when you add a lot of it, is it puts things kind of far back in the mix. That's just how they sound. They don't really sound up close and up front. So a good way to judge the level of your reverb is to use headphones. If you're only using speakers, sometimes we have the tendency to add a little bit more reverb than what might be required for the mix. But if you put on some headphones, the reverb becomes very apparent. There's been a lot of times where it sounded fine in the speakers, but then when I put it in headphones, the reverb was just way too loud. And that's because in headphones, the driver's like right up to your ears, it's blocking out all the ambient noise in the room, so you can really hear the detail and hear all that reverb. Because of this, when I'm mixing reverb in my monitors, I'll set the level to a point that I want it, and then I'll actually dial it back by maybe a couple dB because I know that it's just going to be probably overpowering in the headphones. And overall, when I do this, it makes my mixes cleaner because it prevents me from overdoing any reverb. Mistake number 2 is having too much or too little bass. This is because at low frequencies, the room itself has a huge effect on the frequency response you're hearing. So some frequencies in the bass are going to be louder than others, and some you may not even hear. Because of this, you don't want to rely only on your room to set the level of your bass. You want to use reference tracks and look at them in a spectrum analyzer. I personally use Voxengo Span, but really any spectrum analyzer works, there's even one built into Ableton. When you're looking at the analyzer, you want to see the relative level of the bass compared to the other frequency ranges in the track. For example, the bass might be 2 dB louder than the mids, and you can look at that and see if your track has the same tonal balance as well. Another thing you want to do is reference your track on a lot of different systems. The more systems and environments that you listen to your track on, the better of an idea you'll have of how that track really sounds and compares to other tracks. Ideally, you'll want to reference your track in the environment that it's most likely going to be played, especially when you're DJing and you're playing professionally mixed and mastered tracks against your track. It will really show if there's any problems in the mix or if your track doesn't have that professional sound quality. Another tendency I've observed is that people that use headphones for mixing tend to crank up the bass more than it needs to because the headphones itself, you're not really feeling the bass in your chest or anything like that. So most people end up, including myself, turning up the headphones a lot and also turning up the bass just so you can actually feel something like vibrating. So that's just another thing to be cognizant of when you're mixing on headphones. Now moving on to mistake number 3, and that is not using any transitional effects or fills to bridge sections of your song. Now this is something I can relate to because adding effects is probably my least favorite thing to do when producing a song, but it's a minute yet crucial detail that can really help just glue parts of the song together. You don't have to go too crazy and over the top with it, but even just little effects, drum fills and stuff like that can give the track that extra few percent to really make it a banger. Now for mistake number 4, and that is overdoing the amount of sounds going on in a track. I would say that most hit tracks are actually quite simple, and the reason is you don't need a ton of different things going on to make a good track. At the end of the day, we can only focus on so many sounds at once. It's better to have a few really solid elements of your track rather than a bunch of mediocre ones. Back when I started producing, I would make this mistake of just adding more and more and more layers to the track, but I realized that the reason I was doing that was because the core elements of the track were honestly pretty mediocre, and I felt the need to just add more layers in order to compensate for that. Whereas I wouldn't need to do that if the core elements of my track were just really solid to begin with. Last but not least is mistake number 5, and that is not utilizing any sends or returns and always putting effects directly on the channel. Now, it's not always a bad thing to put effects directly on the channel. There is a time and place for that. However, if you're not utilizing sends and returns at all, then you are making a mistake. A send and return allows you to do something called parallel processing. With parallel processing, essentially what's happening is the signal is being split into two. One where it is not being processed by the effect, and another where it's being fully processed by the effect. The most common use case of this is reverb and delay. So you would put your reverb and or delay on the return channel and set that wetness to 100%. And then you would send the dry signal to the return channel. This way, you are now controlling exactly how much effect you want. When you put something like reverb directly on the channel, you end up losing a lot of the body of the sound, especially on something like drums. It really just takes out the punchiness. Pretty much all reverb plugins have a mix knob that goes from, dry to wet. However, as you turn up that mix knob, you'll notice that the dry sound gets quieter and the reverb gets louder. When you're mixing it through a send and return, aka parallel processing, the dry sound doesn't get quieter as you turn up the reverb, thereby retaining the body of the sound. And there you have it. That is 5 beginner mistakes that you now know how to avoid. And because of that, you should leave a like on the video if you haven't already done it. Subscribe to the channel, follow me on Insta, blah blah blah. Check out my music, because I do make music, by the way. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next video. Peace.